Well, in honor of Valentine's Day, I wanted to take a look at a couple things. Some trivia, maybe, for Valentine's Day for you. Did you know that 15% of women send themselves flowers on Valentine's Day? About 3% of pet owners give a Valentine's Day gift to their pets. In the United States, 64% of men do not make plans in advance for a romantic Valentine's Day for their sweetheart. So, if you wanted to do it, like as soon as midnight breaks for Valentine's Day, you're too late, guys. But because we're having service this morning, you have, about 15 more hours. So I encourage you to leave here if you haven't already and make some plans. Who do you think receives the most Valentine's Day cards? Teachers. Teachers receive more Valentine's Day cards than any other group, followed by children, mothers, wives, and then sweethearts, etc. Valentine's Day is big business. This shocked me. It may not shock you, but consumers will spend an average of $77.43. What? Do you guys spend that much money? Here's my concern. It's not even the $77. My concern is I spend, if I really go overboard, I might spend $25, including kids. Maybe let's round up. Let's assume that Let's assume I've spent, like half of that 77, like, 38 or 39. If I spent that much, somebody's spending $140 to balance it out. That's insane. $77 on average is being spent on gifts. All right, so let's take it one step further. Girls have some rules for guys. All right, so I'm going to read the top 10 here. I don't feel like talking right now is an acceptable thing to say. Unacceptable thing is to sit there and pretend you're listening and just say, uh-huh, or yes, dear. Rule number 1 for ladies. Ladies, second rule, ask for directions. Number 3, take directions from your GPS. Don't take directions from your GPS over your wife. And don't give her a name. Your GPS. Any guys have the British version? I don't know. Siri sounds better in English. Number 4, don't fix it if it's not broken. You really don't need to take everything apart just out of curiosity. Number 5, get rid of your holy underwear, guys. It's one of her rules. Number 6, your way is not always the right way. Learn to say, I was wrong. Practice, guys. Ready? I was wrong. Okay, we got some practicing. Number 7, we're not your mothers, so don't expect us to clean after you like one. Clean up after you like one. Number 8, don't say you understand when you don't. Number 9, if you ever beat us in a sport or a game, it's always because you cheated. Number 10, if you beat us in a game, don't rub it in. If we beat you in a game, we will rub it in. That's just the way it works. And that is true. And if Gina was here, I could just bring up one word, monopoly, and that would just settle it. I have to let her win. And it just doesn't work if I don't. And if she wins, she's going to rub it in pretty hard. But the rules are always for ladies. So guys, we need some rules, right? So here are the rules from the guys. Men, number 1, men are not mind readers. Number 2, learn to work the toilet seat. You're a big girl. If it's up, put it down. We need it up, you need it down. You don't hear us complaining about you leaving the seat down. Number 3, crying is blackmail. Number 4, come to us with a problem only if you want help solving it. That's what we do. Sympathy is what your girlfriends are for. Number 5, anything we said 6 months ago is inadmissible in an argument. In fact, all comments become null and void after 7 days. If something we said can be interpreted 2 ways, and one of those ways makes you feel sad or angry, we meant the other one. Number 7, Christopher Columbus did not need directions, neither do we. Number 8, if we ask what is wrong and you say nothing, we will act as if nothing's wrong. We know you're lying, but it's just not worth the hassle. Number 9, if you have a question you don't want an answer to, expect an answer you didn't want to hear. And number 10, don't ask us what we're thinking unless you're prepared to talk about subjects such as sex, cars, or sports. Because that's what we're thinking. Yes, I know I may have to sleep on the couch tonight. But did you know men really don't mind that? It's kind of like camping. All right, that was fun. We are going to talk about love a little bit this morning, but not the romantic kind of love. I just thought I would kick it off just to have a little fun with you this morning. And you can pull out your worship programs this morning. We're going to be in John chapter 21. Is there anyone in here who does not have a Bible with you who would like one? If so, please raise your hand. I'll have somebody bring one to you. All right. Nobody? All right. And, I want to say this week has reminded me that things in our lives can be really difficult, especially where it relates to love. I know of a lady who attends our church fairly regularly whose father is in the hospital, and things do not look good. She's been up there with him a great deal over the past 3 weeks, and it seems like one thing has added to another, and we continually are in prayer for her. But also we have a good friend who attends sometimes. She lives in the city, and her sister passed away this week. And as I was at the funeral, listening to her husband share a little bit about his wife, you could hear the pain in his voice. And something I haven't heard a lot in funerals, you hear him talk about all of the good things they remember about the one who's passed away. But I heard this man share how difficult this was. He said, I had no idea how much the pain would hurt until it happened. He said it's unbearable. I'm not sure I've heard that a lot before, but it tells me of a man who deeply loved and felt love from his wife. And now there's a separation there. And when there's a separation in the love relationship, there is pain where love should be. Let's go ahead and turn in your Bible to John, the 21st chapter, and we're going to read most of that chapter together this morning. This is one of my favorite passages of the Bible. I know I say that most weeks, but when I dig into these passages as I'm preparing to give a message, what I really want to look at to kind of help you understand how these things come together is the context. And it seems like no matter how many years of education I've had in preparing and studying the Bible and things like that, it seems like God always shows me not necessarily some new piece of information I didn't know, but He enlightens me with new context that helps me understand the text better. So beginning in verse 1, After Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, it happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples, I think that's 7 total, were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "Well, we'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw the net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, and you know who that is, right? The disciple whom Jesus loved is John, and John wrote this book. You like the way he describes himself? He doesn't refer to any of the other disciples as the ones who Jesus loved. The one who Jesus loved, I'm not going to call any names, guys, but that's the writer of this book, by the way, John. And then the disciple who Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And as soon as Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off. Just so you know, he hadn't taken everything off. This wasn't skinny dipping in the fishing season. It was his outer garment that he took off, so it's kind of like they're wearing some shorts and getting some sun while they're fishing. He decided to grab his outer garments, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far away from shore, only about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire burning coals where they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." And Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and then did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Let's stop right there. We'll go back to the rest of that later. What do you do when you get into a place where you've made a major change in your life to go down the right path, to do something different, to turn kind of from the old thing you've been doing that hasn't gotten you very far in life, and you're really heading down a new path? You've got a new set of friends. Maybe you've left a bad relationship, and you're going down the right path, but all of a sudden something gets derailed. All of a sudden, what seemed to be the way that you're going in life, it stops. Something happens. Maybe you've left a bad relationship and now you've entered into a new relationship that's positive and that's bringing good things and, getting all the bad things out of the way. Maybe they go to church and you're starting to go to church and you realize, hey, this person is right for me. I've been following the wrong person for a long time. Ladies, you like to follow these bad guys all the time. And maybe at some point you quit following the bad guy and you connect with a good guy. You're having a positive relationship, and then something happens. Then he steps out of the relationship, or he moves away, or the job that you got that's taken you out of some job that was in the bad part of your life, and you've got some new path or direction, and then you lose the job. Sometimes those things derail the path you're on. And what do you do? What do you do when you get derailed from that path? Most of us, when our plans for this new or better life get derailed, we fall back into destructive or distractive habits. And that's in your notes. Destructive or distractive habits. And you remember, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, that when we talk about habits and creating new habits, sometimes we create habits to feel the bad part of our life. And the problem is with creating new habits sometimes is we go right back to the old habit when the new one falls short. In other words, we want to make ourselves feel better. So something positive in our life is taking place. And when that stops, we now feel pain. And so in order to soothe the pain, we go to our addiction, right? Some of you got some past with drugs or alcohol. Maybe it's money or shopping. Maybe it's relationships. But sometimes when we get derailed from the good path, we fall back into destructive habits. But it's not just destructive habits that get us off track. Sometimes it's not a bad habit. It's just a habit that takes us away from where we were going. So I call that a distractive habit. And I think that's where we find Peter this morning. Does anybody remember what Peter did for a living? He was a fisherman. Do you remember what happened the last time he went fishing? He saw a man named Jesus preaching on the shore. We talked about this 4 weeks ago. He saw a man preaching on the shore, and that man said, "Leave your nets and leave everything and follow me." So three and a half years ago, Peter left his fishing, and he began to follow Jesus. And now something's broken. Something is very broken because Jesus has died. He was resurrected, but he's no longer here. And Peter doesn't know how to function without Jesus beside him to follow the plan that he was on. So he's fallen back into a distractive habit. What did he say in verse 3? I'm going fishing. I don't know what to do right now. We've been in the upper room together trying to figure out what we do. We've been praying. We've been planning. And nothing's going right. So Peter says, guys, I don't know anymore. I'm going fishing. And apparently 6 others thought it sounded like a pretty good idea, a pretty good way to numb the pain that they're suffering right now. So they said, all right, we'll go too. And 4 weeks ago we talked about this. We talked about his last time fishing. What happened when they were fishing? Do you remember the story that we talked about when Jesus came to call his first disciples and called Peter? They had been fishing all night, and what happened? They didn't catch any fish. Does that sound familiar? Right now, he's been fishing all night with his other disciples, and what happened? They caught no fish. I imagine at this point, remember, Peter is trying to find a distraction to the pain. I imagine that Peter, the fisherman, in his place that he feels comfortable in his boat, is sitting there as the morning light comes up and they've caught no fish, saying, remember, this is the first time in 3 years he's been back in the boat. And he's probably saying, wow, I remember last time I was fishing. This same thing happened. We didn't catch anything. All night long we fished and we caught nothing. And here I am again. My Lord is no longer with me. And I'm fishing. And I'm not catching any fish. And it's probably taken him back to that day. And he's remembering. He caught no fish, and now he's sitting on the shore, mending his nets, listening to Jesus talk. And I've got to think he's going over and over that in his mind. And then a guy on the shore says, "Did you guys catch any fish?" And they say, "No." "Why don't you throw your net on the other side of the boat? You'll find some fish there." And I suspect for just a brief moment, Peter, probably not even looking up, just hearing this, as he's staring off into space, said, "Great, thanks for the advice. Been a fisherman all my life. That's pretty stupid. What's the difference between this side of the boat and that side of the boat? About 8 feet. I suspect the fish could have found their way under the boat, back and forth to the net. But hey, I guess the disciples were looking for something to do. And then I suppose that same thought, once again, Peter says, that's what Jesus said. He wanted me to do something stupid. He wanted me to go fishing again after I've been working all night and catching nothing. Jesus told me to go back out and fish. And in fact, that's the whole reason I'm following him today. I remember that great catch. And about that time, as he's just going through the motions, thinking all of this in his head, they start loading the fish into the net. And Peter's thinking, man, this is kind of eerie. It's kind of eerie. The last time this happened, we met Jesus, the man who I just spent the last 3 years of my life 24/7 with. And Peter's probably in his mind thinking, it's been so long. I spent all my time with Jesus, and now he's gone. And I failed him. It's the Lord, John says. Broke into Peter's thought process. It's the Lord, and Peter must have jumped up and looked. What? And then all of a sudden it starts coming together, his thoughts of what's happening right now and how it tied back to what happened when he met Jesus 3 years ago. All of a sudden Peter saw and he knew exactly what was going on. He saw Jesus on the shore, and so he gathered his clothes, not waiting for the other disciples, because the one who Jesus loved and Peter were kind of always in competition, so he could get to Jesus first. So Peter grabs all his clothes, knowing that if he's going first, maybe these knuckleheads aren't going to get there in time, and he's going to be like half naked on the shore. So he grabs his clothes, dives in the water, swims 100 yards. That's the length of a football field, carrying your clothes. That's a pretty good feat. And all of a sudden, Peter begins to see what's taking place. And he swims to the shore, and the guys back in the boat, without Peter's help, the one that's the real fisherman, they're bringing in the nets, and Peter's all of a sudden face to face with Jesus, who is sitting by a charcoal fire. And the last time that Peter saw Jesus with a fire between them was on the night that he denied Jesus 3 times. And so once again, he's taken back to a previous experience with Jesus. But this one is painful. This one is different. Peter's thinking that he blew it with Jesus. He's thinking that he made a huge mistake, and I suspect some of you have been there. I know that I've been there. Some of you know my testimony, some of you don't. In 9th grade, I was a very active kid involved in the youth group. My family didn't go to church. I had a youth pastor who's discipling me. I had been the child who his family was falling apart outside the church, and I was in the church every time the doors were open, and I sat at the feet of anyone who would teach. And by 9th grade, I felt God calling me into a full-time ministry. In fact, I went up before the church at one point in 9th grade to say I felt God had called me into full-time ministry. And I know what that feeling is like when you know you want nothing else but to serve and walk with Jesus, because this story is so important. The problem is, later in high school, after some things had kind of fallen apart within the youth group in the church, and the youth pastor left, and kind of my faith foundation fell apart, and then I went over into college at a secular university where all of a sudden the pressures of life come in. So my faith foundation's falling apart, and I enter into the secular world, and I do what most college students do, even those who grew up in church. I began to party, drink, join a fraternity, sleeping with my girlfriend, things like that. And I became a person who is no longer walking with God. But the interesting part about this is, I left God, he didn't leave me. Because all of the stuff that was happening that I was doing, all the partying and all that stuff, guess what? While all my friends would, in the fraternity house, which I lived in the fraternity house, if you can believe that. I still have a hard time imagining that I did that. In the morning after the great Saturday night, they're always like, man, we did this, we did that, that's so awesome. And I sat there making all these commitments to God and man that I would never drink again, that I would never do any of these things. And I did that every week because I was so convicted and miserable, while the other guys could thoroughly enjoy what they were doing. I could not. But I continued to live that way. Almost immediately after graduation, I got my life back on track with God. And in fact, it was very simple to me because God had been working on me that whole time. And that last year of college, though I was kind of alone, I wasn't back involved with the faith group, I was beginning to read my Bible again, and I knew God was drawing me back. And as I got my life right with God, and I was really beginning to walk with Him immediately after college, I was sad because I knew I had blown it. I knew that commitment I made, or that calling I thought I had received in ninth grade, I had blown it and gone too far away from that, and God would never use me now. I knew that. And while I kept growing deeper and stronger and being more and more involved in the church, I knew that He could not use me anymore, and that was tremendously painful to me, knowing that I had blown it that much. And I suspect, whether it's a calling to ministry or whether it's just a calling to walk with God, some of you have been there. And some of you maybe are there right now thinking, God wanted this from me, but I've made too many mistakes. I've fallen too far from God. He can't use me anymore. When we fail God, next point, when we fail God, we often feel that God can no longer use us. We fail God. We believe that He cannot use us. Peter was thinking this through. And he suddenly awakened out of his daydream, and he swims over to shore. And there's Jesus waiting for him, sitting across from a fire. And the last thing he remembers is the last time he was sitting across a fire from Jesus. Turn in your Bibles to John chapter 13. And I want to be sure that you all have the context of what happened in this denial, in the pain that Peter felt. After Jesus washes their feet in the upper room, and they break bread together, what we call the Last Supper. You remember the picture of the disciples all sitting on one side of the table? I think I actually put something on Facebook this week where somebody checks in, says, I have a party, I need a table for 26, and the host says, but you only have 13 people. He said, I know, we're going to sit on the same side. That's the picture. That's what they're doing. And in this, at the very end of that passage, where you see here, Jesus begins talking about how He's going to have to go away. He's not going to be with them forever like He is in the room. He says, now I'm going to have to go away. And then Jesus said, I'm going to go away, and where I'm going, you can't come with me now, but you can come later. And Peter says, no, Jesus, I will go with you. I will lay down my life for you. Peter says he'll lay down his life for Jesus. And Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you that before the rooster crows 3 times, you will disown me 3 times. So here's Peter, once again, being kind of cocky and boastful, saying, Jesus, I'll go all the way with you. I will die for you. And Jesus warns him, you're going to deny me. Not die for me, but deny me 3 times. And so in Luke 22, it gives a picture of what happened at that time. The third person had just asked Peter if he knew Jesus, and Peter said, man, I don't know who you're talking about. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And listen to what happened next. And he went outside and wept bitterly. This is the context for what Peter is seeing when he arrives at the shore by himself and sees Jesus across from the fire. He's got to immediately see, wow, what do I say? I don't even know how to talk to the man that I so boastfully said, I will die for you. And then I denied him immediately when 3 people asked me if I knew him because I was afraid for my own safety. Notice also here the imagery of fish and bread. Does that sound familiar? Is it interesting that when he arrives on shore, he sees Jesus sitting by a fire and there are fish cooking on the fire and there's some bread? This is before they brought in their fish. Do you think the disciples, including Peter, might have remembered one of the greatest miracles Jesus ever performed in feeding 5,000 people? So Jesus said, I fed them. Now I will feed you. I know Peter probably noticed that. So as they began to set and eat, Jesus went a step further because I believe this story was meant for Peter. Not for the 7, but for Peter. And then after they ate, Jesus took Peter aside. He wanted to have a private conversation with Peter. I think he even told John to go away so that he could talk to Peter. And what he tells him is powerful, but also what he doesn't say is powerful. He doesn't say, Peter, I'm really disappointed in you. He doesn't say, you know what, you blew it. He doesn't say, you know, Peter, you're really not the guy I thought you were. He doesn't say, Peter, I can't use you anymore. Instead, he simply asks, do you love me? I'm not sure if they can put it back on the screen, but to go back to that passage, we'll finish that now. In verse 15, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? What are these? Does anybody know? I don't know either. Do you love me more than you love these other disciples? Do you love me more than these disciples love me? Do you love me more than the fish? I don't know. But Jesus said, I want you to love me more than these. Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. And again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. And the 3rd time, he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus says, feed my sheep. Why do you think Jesus asked him 3 times? I suspect that Peter didn't get that part yet. But Peter was struggling knowing how he had just failed Jesus. And Jesus knew what was in Peter's head. He knew what he was thinking. And so he asks him the first time. Peter doesn't really get it. He just says, Lord, you know I love you. And in fact, there's some different words used in here. It's kind of interesting, and some would debate whether or not the difference in the words is significant. And, you know, there's multiple words for love in the Greek language. And it would almost be as if Jesus said, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, Lord, you know I'm fond of you. Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I'm fond of you. Peter, are you really fond of me? Jesus, you know all things. You know I'm fond of you. You get how that fell out? Twice. Jesus used agape, and Peter responded with phileo. The love, friendly love. Philadelphia. What is it? The friendly city, whatever they call it. And then in the end, Jesus went back and used his language. Do you phileo me? Do you really love me as a brother? And Peter said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I do. And I don't know why that language is different. It could have been just in John's writing, but I suspect that Jesus was setting a standard for Peter that he wanted him to love in the way God loves, and in a higher level. And Peter probably, out of humility, knew he couldn't say it. You know, sometimes when people say, do you really love God? Do you really follow Jesus? You know, we all want to say, I follow Jesus, but the reality is, if we say that, sometimes if we want to think deeply about that and be really, really honest, we might say, it's hard for me to say that I love Jesus because I know that the person I'm about to say this to has seen me in action and might not think that I'm really loving Jesus. So I might be careful in how I word this. You know, I might want to say, you know what, Jesus is important to me. I don't always show it, but you know what, I follow him and I try to follow him and I want, you know, so you start kind of qualifying it because you know they're not going to, they might step back and say, you don't love Jesus. Come on, I've seen what you do at work. So Peter may have been answering in that way. He may have been saying all he could say. And then I think Jesus said, in the third time, he responded to Peter in a different way. And remember, Peter didn't get frustrated about the question the second time. He got frustrated the third time, and it may be that with that frustration, he finally got what Jesus was getting at. And that is this. You've messed up. You feel like a failure. But when I said, feed my sheep 3 times, I've shown you forgiveness. When I saw you weep bitterly when the rooster crowed, you repented already. I'm here today to be sure you know my forgiveness, to be sure you know I love you, and to be sure when I say feed my sheep that I will still use you. And in fact, he drew such a correlation between his calling at the Sea of Galilee and this final time that he has with Jesus. I believe Jesus created this entire story in chapter 21 just for Peter, and at the end, Peter had to say, everything in this story takes me back to the beginning. Jesus is giving me a fresh start. Because if we flip over to verse 19, Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death that Peter would glorify God. But then he said to him, and this is the final part, he said, Peter, follow me. And that was the last part of Jesus' calling of Peter. Here, we have a fresh start. So there's a few things I want to throw out at you in way of application. First of all, just as Jesus created this story because he would do that for one person, he would do that for Peter, I believe he wants to do that for you. And if you will be responsive to him as he's speaking to you, I believe he'll create these stories in your life like he did for Peter. First, I think the most important question that any of us can deal with today is to answer the question, do you love Jesus? Do you love Jesus? Not do you know a lot about Jesus? Not are you a member of a church? Not have you prayed the Lord's Prayer before bedtime for 60 years? Not have you followed the 10 Commandments? But do you love Jesus? Number 2. No matter how great we have failed, Jesus stands ready to forgive us and give us a fresh start. Have you ever been haunted by a failure? Peter was, and Jesus restored it. But Jesus took Peter back to the beginning. He reminded him of his calling, and he gave him a fresh start. Number 3, if we will turn to Jesus after our failures, he can still use us. You see, Peter struggled with pride, with arrogance. He struggled with, we sometimes call it foot and mouth disease. He always had his foot in his mouth. He always was saying things a whole lot stronger than he could ever back them up. And here we see Peter in humility. He was humbled by this experience. No longer boastful. Instead, he was content to say, Lord, and remember in the third one? In the third time he said, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know me. You know all things. But Peter had to learn a lesson. And so when we mess up, Jesus does not just stand ready to restore us. We do have to turn to him. And if we turn to him, he can still use us. In verse 19, he finishes it the same way he started, by telling Peter, follow me. If we want to know what love is, we don't have to pick up a dictionary, and we don't have to survey people on the street about Valentine's Day. The story about love I'm talking about this morning is not the story of Jesus asking Peter, do you love me? The story about love that I'm talking about this morning is the story where Jesus creates this entire scenario to show his love for Peter. And each one of us in this room are messed up, broken people who fail God regularly. Jesus showed us through his relationship with Peter that no matter how dumb you've been, how far you've fallen, how many times you've rejected God, he is still there, waiting for you to return to him and for him to restore you. Love is forgiveness. Love is reconciliation. Love is renewal. And through Christ, all of us, undeserving as we are, can be restored and renewed in Christ.